So it looks like landlords are being bashed again by MPs looking to curry favour with voters. There's a House of Commons Commission report about further regulation on the private rented sector. To discuss this wonderful news, I'm joined as usual by Andrew Roberts. Hi, Andrew.
Hi, Ranjan, and what a delightful topic you've called me in for today.
As if we need this. Really, I've had a look through this and I don't see anything that isn't covered by existing rules and regulations, and this is just another excuse to bash landlords in the media, really for no benefit here. Am I being too simplistic?
No, I don't think you are being too simplistic. I think if I was to look at it, they've pulled out 5 areas that are of interest. But if we go up to a top level, you can understand government concern. 11 million people live in the private rental sector. And what the government are claiming is that 13% of them live in houses or accommodation which is substandard. And that substandard accommodation, they are saying, amounts to 589,000 houses. Now, there are only 2.4 million rental properties in the marketplace. So there's a disconnect in the government stats here.
Yes, I think you're right. 589,000 houses being substandard is a lot. We have to look at what is substandard. It might be look, there are some squalors around, and these are very, very small minority, but no way is it 598,000. I think these figures are very much similar to when they talk about people living below the poverty line in the UK.
Yes,
it's not.
Well, I
might be being controversial here, but it's not as in some parts of the world.
Well, I don't think because being controversial.
It's relative to the mean, and
Absolutely.
The mean here is completely different.
If I look at the report, they're saying 25% of landlords refuse to rent to a person with an overseas passport. And furthermore, 52% of landlords will not rent to somebody on benefits. Now, let's ask ourselves the question here. The government have a policy where they will only pay rent at the bottom third of the market rate. Now, we did a video recently and we discussed how rents are rising between 10 and 15% per annum. So the government are not keeping the benefits up with the increase in rental prices, so people are being squeezed out. So it's not a case of landlords won't rent to them all the time. It's more a case of affordability, and they don't pass the affordability tests.
That is very true. This whole thing about, what was that statistic about people not wanting to rent to people with an overseas passport?
25%.
I think that is very poor piece of statistical evidence. Firstly, from our own renting activities, anyone with an overseas passport with a job or in full-time education, there's no reason not to rent. People come here with jobs and they're looking for accommodation straight away and they get housing straight away. There's no issue there. So I don't think I think it's too simplistic to look at what passport they've got. Mm-hmm. It needs to be looking at whether they're looking for social housing or private housing.
I think it also comes back to a different government policy, the Right to Rent Act. Now, it might be that these people with the overseas passports do not actually pass the right to rent acid tests.
That is a very, very good point. And that, again, that's simplistic because the folks with jobs, and obviously we also let to a lot of foreign students coming here in London, they've obviously got the adequate or required stamps on their passports. So they pass those sort of checks.
Absolutely.
So you can't then put the blame in this report on landlords if you've got a right to rent check that insists on checking for the valid stats.
The valid stats, yeah. Well, it's interesting. We've done this before with a number of our previous videos where we've said you actually need to go back to the source of the data. And this is where it gets funny. The government actually admit as part of this report they don't actually have the data to make accurate decisions, and there are a lot of assumptions in this report.
It's crazy. I mean, tell us what you think in the comments below. I mean, do you really think people are not are just looking at non-UK passports and rejecting people for tenancies, or outside of a right to rent reason? The other interesting thing, the stat that they've quoted in this House of Commons report is this 589,000 homes. The wording is interesting. It says there are 589,000 properties in the UK that currently pose a serious threat to the health and safety of renters. Now, if there are 589,000 homes that were this serious threat to health and safety and all of that, why aren't there stories every single week in the news about so-and-so has had their leg chopped off because of an unsafe house or whatever it is? There would be stories every single week.
Absolutely. I mean, people getting electrocuted or whatever it be, they are not getting affected in the levels that are being reported. Now, again, this is where the data comes in, and point 2 of this report was interesting. It says that the local councils do not have the capability or capacity to undertake relevant checks. Now, let's have a look at things like compliance on landlords. There's licensing areas. There's the HMO licensing as well as the selective licensing. And with all of that licensing, the councils are making huge amounts of money. Now, if they're making huge amounts of money from the licensing, why are they not able to use that money to enforce poor quality housing? And when we look at the enforcement actions, there is 16 in the last 5 years. That's hardly massive enforcement.
That is true, but what you are saying is that there are existing mechanisms already in place to deal with the issue of poor quality housing. And I do not believe there are that many in the grand scheme of things, because the majority of rented properties are owned and run by people who do so as a professional business. So all they do is come up with more regulation. There's an increasing cost of compliance. We meet those costs of compliance, but obviously that's passed back because it is fundamentally a business at the end of the day. But there's always a small core of people that stay under the radar, perhaps beds and sheds or whatever. They're doing under the radar stuff. And this regulation does not address someone who has got a bed in a shed, maybe taking cash payments and doing things completely off radar, completely off book. There's nothing in here to sort out those people.
No.
Only more costs on the people who are doing it properly, who are already doing it properly, and adding more costs on their customers.
You are totally right. And the government even acknowledged that in point 3 in their report, because point 3 in their report says government does not adequately support local authorities in effectively managing who is renting properties in their areas. Now, this bit gives me a little bit of concern here, because they're saying they don't give enough support to local authorities to know who is renting in their areas. That's almost implying a national landlord register similar to there is in other countries. Now, I'm not so sure that's actually going to solve the problem anyway, because as you say, if there's beds in sheds, they're still going to have beds in sheds. And how are you going to discover those beds in sheds, short of a man going round knocking on everybody's door and opening the shed door?
Well, they are actually. I mean, I understand that in Hounslow they've sent up drones with those heat seekers.
Infrared.
And they're infrared heat-seeking things, and they're looking in the back of gardens for buildings where they can detect human warmth or whatever it is. Scary stuff, isn't it?
I was going to say, if you are a person who gardens and you have a potting shed, just be careful. Hounslow Council might be watching you.
Exactly. Don't let your geraniums get too warm. But there's another aspect to this report that we have to look at, which is the Section 21. The Section 21 is the mechanism where landlords can get their property back at the end of the tenancy without having to give any reason. And just to go back with a bit of history, in the 70s and 80s, there was no incentive for anyone to provide private rented housing, because what would be the point in renting out a property if you couldn't get it back? And then in 1985, Margaret Thatcher brought in the Assured Short-Hold Tenancy Agreement, and alongside that she brought in the Section 21. So this basically said that an AST will last for a set period, 6 months or 1 year, and at the end of that time, without having to give a reason, you can end it. And what that meant was that banks were willing to provide buy-to-let mortgages because they saw that as a secure asset class, because you could regain possession. Previously, before Margaret Thatcher's AST, no one was lending on buy-to-let properties. Buy-to-let as a mortgage product didn't actually exist. So this is back to the 70s, isn't it, if we're abolishing Section 21?
I don't know. I wasn't around in the 70s, Ranjan.
History books.
I couldn't resist that. You set yourself up on that one. You've got to leave that one in there, Connor. Sorry.
Go for it. Go on.
Oh, sorry, I've lost my thread.
I need to do another joke about your shirt, but no. Section 20... Section 21s. They're going to abolish them, good or bad?
Well, personally speaking, as a landlord myself, Section 21s have a place in our toolkit, which is no fault eviction. Now, sometimes tenants can be a problem, and a Section 8 notice is not appropriate because they're not in arrears.
Because Section 8 notices, they are, you have to rely on fixed grounds.
Yes.
One of them is arrears and some of them are breaches and stuff like that. But when you get involved with all of that, you have to then go to court and prove it.
Absolutely.
And that can be a bit of a palaver. Like with arrears, there's a game people can play in that they pay back some of the arrears.
And keep catching up.
Yeah, exactly. Just a couple of days before the court hearing, and then you're stuffed. So you need this sort of mechanism.
Yeah, there needs to be a mechanism to take back control. It could be you're selling the property, it could be a matrimonial, and a Section 1 is like the new divorce rules, which are a no-fault system. So all it is, look, we've agreed to part company, or I want to part company because you're upsetting my neighbours next door, I'd like you gone, politely speaking. So from that point of view, there needs to be a mechanism for a landlord to gain possession of their property. I am aware of a number of landlords who've been abroad, rented out their principal private residence, they've returned home, and now they can't get possession of their own property that they want to live back in. So they're now having to rent whilst they wait to get the tenants out of their own property.
We'll get back to the video in just a moment. What is the most exciting opportunity in property right now? And that is repurposing defunct commercial buildings to residential use. Now, most people don't really know where to start, what to look for, and how to exploit these opportunities. And that's why I've prepared 90 minutes of free training for you to get you started on this wonderful journey. You can register for this free training at property-workshop.com. Join me on that free training, and I'll leave you to enjoy the rest of the video. Do you think banks will start to look at buy-to-lets in a different way if there isn't this mechanism to get back possession in a simple way?
Well, I think banks will continue to lend. However, what I think will happen is either loan to values will reduce, reducing the risk on the bank of holding time, or the rates that they offer will be affected. So it will be less competitive, which if it's costing more to borrow the money, that will put rents up because the margins of landlords go down, or it will cause landlords to extract themselves from the market because the rents are not sufficiently good.
And the other problem, I mean, a lot of these problems, we're talking about these as problems, but I don't actually see them as problems for us as landlords. I actually see them as problems for tenants. Real sad. Yeah. A lot of the measures that we've talked about in previous episodes as well. I mean, we will comply with all of this stuff.
Absolutely.
But it will be bad news for tenants. So how's this bad news for tenants? Well, what it means is that what we have already started doing, and many landlords have started doing this, is upping their game on tenant referencing. So, if you've got A1 grade tenants and you've got sort of B grade tenants, and then you've got, tenants that don't meet the criteria, with no fault eviction, you will take a chance on some B grade tenants. But today, if Section 21 is coming off the books, then you can't afford to do so. If you want to manage your risk as a landlord, you will say, well, only A-grade tenants. If you've got a permanent job, you've been in that employment for at least 6 months, you can see that your salary is coming in a fixed way, you've got absolutely clean credit, blah, blah, blah. So it'll put a whole swathe of people who don't meet the criteria to qualify for social housing. They're in the private rented sector, but they're not quite grade A. So what are those people going to do? And coupled with the fact that we've talked about this in previous videos, there's less housing stock, rental housing stock and stuff like that. Landlords do have that flexibility to cherry pick. Yeah. Do you think that's going to happen, or is it just me?
Well, no, I think it very much is happening now. And I think the other thing I've observed is people have seen the increasing wave of legislation, and a lot of landlords I know, I don't do it myself personally, have converted their inventory to serviced accommodation because they're short lets, people have no transients, that means they have no permanence of abode and they don't store their permanent lifelong possessions there, therefore they can be moved on much more swiftly.
What are serviced accommodation is not something that we do, but don't people have to have an abode somewhere else as their main abode?
Yes,
for
they
it
should
not to be
have
an AST.
their main abode, but you may have people, say builders. I mean, we've got builders who work out of area and they get put up in temporary accommodation, but you only have to look at roadworks and stuff like that. You'll often find caravans parked up where the workers actually sleep. Yeah. Yeah. So they don't really have a permanence because their home is sort of on the back of their tow bar and they travel around the UK wherever the contracts are.
Yes.
So, I personally think there's two things here which are interesting that come out of this report. There is talk about more licensing and the need for a redress scheme for landlords. Now, the way this was tackled in Wales is you could not rent directly to a tenant. You had to go through a registered letting agent who was a member of a redress scheme. They're talking about having a redress scheme for landlords. Mm-hmm. Now, I find that a bit bonkers. But the final thing I find truly bonkers in this report was point 5. And I'm going to read this quote here. The Department of Housing lacks good enough data to understand the nature and the extent of problems renters face. There is insufficient data on the challenges facing landlords, tenants, and local authorities. So they're writing a report to create a policy that they don't have the data, and they actually admit in their white paper that they don't have the data to make the decisions on.
How crazy is that? So when you read that out, you have to ask yourself what the point of this whole report is. It seems to me this is just playing to the voters' gallery. We used to be 30 years ago a home-owning democracy, and that has shifted a little bit as more tenants and more voters have become tenants. It seems to me that government policy is being geared more to renters as in the old days it was more towards homeowners. And this is just playing to that gallery, is it not?
I think firstly it is playing to that gallery. I mean, if we were to look at commercial property that we both enjoy and love, commercial landlords and commercial tenants don't vote at the ballot box because they're companies. Whereas residential tenants do vote at the ballot box. So they're playing to the voter. But I think what this is the government have highlighted there is a distinct lack of data around landlords and the PRS. And this is a backdoor way of saying, actually, we don't know who's in the marketplace. We're going to license everything, and therefore we want everybody's data.
Andrew, I don't accept that. I mean, if you look at the vast majority, virtually every property is properly let. So that means all the data is there in terms of tenancy protection, deposit protection, for example, EPCs and all of that, and the various other certifications that we have to do. It's what we were discussing earlier. The stuff they don't know about is the guy operating a bed in a shed at the bottom of the garden taking cash, and none of this is going to get data on those people.
It won't make a blind bit of difference about that section of the marketplace, which is, I believe, very, very small. But at the end of the day, you have to look at this, and I personally think this is backdoor national licensing of landlords and national joining of either a property redress scheme or forcing everybody to let through a letting agent.
Actually, that's quite thought-provoking. I think that might, who knows, that might happen. I mean, let us know what you guys think about this this report in the comments below. Just throw your questions and comments below. Also, smash this like button if you found this useful. Now, we've had a real moan about this paper put out in the House of Commons, but quite frankly, as a serious property investor, and you guys are serious property investors, you're running your property portfolios as a business, and you're complying with everything that they've actually talked about here. So that's basically the context. It's not as though we don't want to abide by these. This is all stuff we're doing anyway. This is all part of business practice, and there are existing rules that govern all of this stuff right now. So to me, this just seems like an extra layer of nothingness, and perhaps it is backdoor paving the path for the kind of measures that you're alluding to.
Well, I believe it is, and I believe that is... let me put it like this. What you don't measure, you can't manage. And at the moment, the government have admitted in their report they don't have the data, and therefore they can't make decisions or policies. So this is the way that they believe they will be able to get big data on all of us who are in this professional landlording sector.
Big data. Now there's a whole topic of discussion for another time. If you enjoyed this video, smash the like button, subscribe as well, because we put out a lot of videos to help you keep on top of your property investing game. Also, join us at the next Baker Street Property Meet, the UK's largest property investors networking meet for like-minded property investors. We get 300 property investors join us each and every month. You can meet Andrew and myself at those events. Details of the next one are at bakerstreetpropertymeet.com. See you guys in the next video.
I look forward to the fantastic networking that is coming up at the next Baker Street. So it's goodbye from me.
It's goodbye from him.
You live in the USA.
I do live in the
You're over
USA.
here on business.
Yes, I am.
And you've made a special trip to come here to the Baker Street Property Meet.
The quality of people here is better than quite a lot of the other meets.
Come all the way from California, and it's one of the reasons why I'm here, to meet like-minded people, other investors, build my network, and continue learning and growing in the property industry.
I found it's quite informative, and I can meet a lot of amazing people, so I keep coming.
Great knowledge in a great environment with like-minded individuals.
Brilliant!